The Queen's Gambit was a 2020 limited series released for Netflix and was created by showrunners Scott Frank and Alan Scott, and stars Anya Taylor-Joy, Bill Camp, Christine Siddell, Harry Melling, and Thomas Brodie Sangster, among others, and is based on the novel by Walter Tevis. And the synopsis reads, orphaned at the tender age of 9, prodigious introvert Beth Harmon discovers and masters the game of chess in 1960s USA, but child stardom comes at a price. It's been a long time since I've talked about a show on the channel. I think the last series I reviewed was Hawkeye back in 2021, and I've been wanting to do another one of these reviews for some time now, but sadly I haven't really been watching too much TV in the past couple of years, and when I did, I just didn't feel like talking about it. However, I had to talk about this one despite being extremely late to the game. The Queen's Gambit was a phenomenon when it released in 2020, still during the height of COVID, and it was a show I had interest in for sure, but when something becomes so popular overnight and the world just focuses on this one thing for weeks and months on end, I always find it hard to get myself to actually watch it. Much like with the phenomenon surrounding Squid Games. I want to watch the show, but the hype around it just made me disinterested. So here I am nearly 3 years after the release of The Queen's Gambit to talk about a series that I don't even know if it's still talked about like it was when it originally released. But for me, that doesn't really matter. I had actually watched the first episode of the series back in 2021 when a co-worker had me watch it with them, and I really enjoyed that first episode. But I didn't have much drive to pursue the series farther than that. That was until just a few weeks ago when my girlfriend felt like revisiting the series, which is one of her favorites. So over the course of a few weeks, we took our time watching each episode, and at the end of it, I had to say this is one of my favorite limited series I've watched, and I completely understand the hype. And obviously, I must have loved it because here I am talking about it to you guys. But before we get into my thoughts on the show, let's do what we always do here and go behind the scenes to see just how this series was made. The Queen's Gambit started out as a book written by Walter Tevis in 1983. Tevis had already had several of his novels adapted to the big screen, two of the most famous adaptations being The Hustler and The Color of Money, both of which starred Paul Newman, with the latter being directed by Martin Scorsese. The same year of the book's release, New York Times journalist Jesse Kornbluth obtained the screenplay rights, but the project fell through after the author's death in '84. In 1992, screenwriter Alan Scott purchased the rights to the book and wrote his own draft for the film. At different points, several different directors were attached to the project, and in 2007, Heath Ledger planned to make his directorial debut with Elliot Page starring as Beth Harmon. Eventually, in 2019, Netflix greenlit a 7-part miniseries based on the book, with Scott Frank both writing and directing the series and creating the show along with Alan Scott, who had initially worked on getting an adaptation off the ground. When it came to writing the show, former world chess champion Garry Kasparov and chess coach Bruce Pandolfini worked as consultants. Interestingly, Pandolfini had worked as a consultant for the original novel as well, and even came up with the book's title, The Queen's Gambit. Kasparov, Pandolfini, and several other consultants on the show helped in developing the chess moves used for the script, and helped in developing critical moments in the story based on these moves. Uli Hainisch served as the production designer for the series, developing the sets meant to evoke the 50s and 60s. Filming actually took place mainly in Berlin, as many of the interiors there could easily stand in for other locations found in the series, such as Vegas, Paris, and Mexico City. Many locations found around Berlin were used for the shooting of the series, such as the Berlin Zoo and the Kino International, among others. Principal photography actually began in Cambridge, Ontario, though, in 2019, where they used several of the homes and buildings there for areas meant to be set in Kentucky before moving to Berlin for the majority of the shoot. The score for the series was done by Carlos Rivera, who was initially asked by Scott Frank to do primarily a piano-based score, but in the end it was decided that a full orchestral score would be used for more instrumental depth and color. Rivera had discovered executive producer William Horberg's love of flute and added prominent flute sections to the orchestral pieces as well. Scoring for chess became a challenge early on, and Rivera had even been warned that the score would end up having to do a lot of the heavy lifting. So Rivera decided to reflect Beth's growth both as a person and a chess player by adding more and more instrumentation over time. The series was released on October 23rd, 2020, and quickly became one of Netflix's most watched miniseries, and by November, there were reports the show had been viewed by nearly 62 million households. On release, The Queen's Gambit was met with universal critical acclaim from most publication sources, praising the writing, direction, and Anya Taylor-Joy's performance, making her an instantly recognizable star overnight. The series would also go on to be a critical darling, receiving many nominations at several awards ceremonies, and went home with 2 Emmy wins for Outstanding Limited Series and Outstanding Directing in a Limited Series. The show also went on to be received very positively by the chess community overall, with only minor complaints given, and it's even responsible for a renewed interest in the game. But with all that out of the way, let's go into my thoughts on the series. The Queen's Gambit's biggest strength is how it's able to take a very simple story but layer it with an intriguing, unruly, and complex protagonist. This is a story we've seen before. A sports prodigy is discovered, climbs the ranks, and has their own personal issues that hinder their performance, but they eventually end up on top and have a transformative character arc. That's The Queen's Gambit in a nutshell, but it's what it does with its characters, music, writing, and so on that makes it stand apart from other very similar stories. And I think spreading this story over 7 episodes instead of a feature-length film allows you to experience the character transformations more naturally. You get to spend more time with this fascinating character, and by the end of this series, I fell in love with Beth Harmon and her story. Let's go ahead and talk about the star herself, Beth Harmon, brought wonderfully to life by Anya Taylor-Joy in what has become her most iconic performance, and the one she will forever be remembered for. Beth Harmon is like any kind of protagonist, but it's what they do with her and how she's written and how she's acted that makes her stand out, and I love every bit of it. When we first see Beth, she's an orphan living much of her young life at an all-girls orphanage, and she already is very quiet and introverted. She doesn't talk much, especially in the first half of the first episode, where we are seeing her becoming accustomed to her surroundings, and she slowly begins to make friends with characters such as Jolene, who instills some of Beth's early rebellious nature in her. But the real Beth Harmon comes out when she's introduced to the janitor, Mr. Scheibel, played wonderfully by Bill Camp, who is an actor I always like seeing, and through this relationship, he begins to teach her how to play chess, and it instills this love of the game in her. I love their scenes together because their friendship eventually gets this father-daughter dynamic, and it's wonderfully done. After watching the series all the way through, it showed me just how important this episode is to telling Beth's story, because right from the start, we understand her character as an introvert and incredibly smart. But we also witness firsthand her drug dependency as she becomes hooked on horse tranquilizers, which actually end up helping her focus on things such as chess. Very early on, we witness one of my favorite visuals in the show, which is when Beth gets in her own head and lays down at night and plays chess games by visualizing the chess pieces on the ceiling. I love these moments because not only are they inventive, but they add to the peculiarities of the Beth character that makes her a bit of an oddball. But the story for me really gets started when a grown Beth, which at this point is played by Anya Taylor-Joy, is adopted by a well-off family. But problems arise when the husband, Mr. Wheatley, divorces his wife, but leaves the house to her. And it's here we get to see Beth form another relationship with her adopted mother, Alma, who really champions Beth to get involved in chess. And they use Beth's gift to make money and live a bit of a glamorous life. It's these moments I enjoy the most as Beth enters the chess scene and meets other chess enthusiasts like Harry Beltic, Benny Watts, and D.L. Towns. And then it came to me what makes this show so special, and it's the character relationships, and particularly the relationships Beth makes with all the characters throughout. Beth is an introvert, so she mainly uses chess as her window into being social. All her social circles involve chess. For her, there's nothing else in life. And you have people such as Benny and Towns that are pushing her farther and farther down the chess rabbit hole. But even her mother, Alma, is beginning to see that maybe she needs more than chess in her life. And we also see firsthand how many of her relationships seem to end throughout the series. Beth can't attach herself to people for too long because it gets in the way of her chess. But it's also a psychological thing, as she grew up with a father that didn't really want to have anything to do with her, and a mother that didn't really want her either. So it's no wonder that Beth forms a dependency for drugs and alcohol, which is her greatest enemy in the series, as it causes many different problems throughout, even causing her to lose a game in the middle of the series, which serves as a huge cut to her character. That's the interesting thing about Beth. She can't take losing. She gets so analytical that sometimes her judgment becomes a bit clouded, and it leads to several problems throughout the show. It just makes her a very complex and interesting character, and Anya Taylor-Joy is so good. It portrays this character and makes her a bit of a mystery. Sometimes she's very hard to read. You don't know exactly what's going through her head, and that can make her a little bit hard to relate to, which is fine because I think there's a purpose to this. I loved every episode of this show, but as I was watching it, I did feel this disconnect between myself and Beth. I loved her because I found her to be a fascinating character, but I found her hard to connect to because she closes herself off from everyone and doesn't really talk much about herself to others either. There's very few that she confides in on an emotional level because most of the time it's just about chess. She lets chess consume her life because deep down she's really hurting inside, and we don't really get to see that much. We rarely see the element about Beth that makes her human. So I struggled through a majority of the episodes trying to relate to Beth. And then there's this moment that comes early on in the final episode where the walls break down, and for the first moment in the entire series, we see Beth cry. She has a real human moment, and it's powerfully done, and it caught me off guard. And even I shedded a few tears as well, because at last I connected with Beth Harmon, and I realized her character arc through this entire series wasn't about her becoming the best chess player of all time. It was about her opening herself up to pain, love, and all the other emotions we feel on a daily basis. It was here I realized how much I loved this series and how well crafted the story and dialogue were. The Queen's Gambit is that good because of the way it treats its main character as more than just a person from which you get the story, but they make her a real person that you might not relate to at first, but give it time and you will be rewarded. Beth has locked up all her emotions throughout the series, and in this one moment of release, it's really a special moment and made the series for me. That's just the making of a good story for me, when the writing blends with the emotion of the story, and I think it was expertly handled through the directing and writing. Other areas I think the series excels in include how they make chess so interesting and filmed incredibly well. Chess is literally just two people sitting and playing, and through clever editing, cinematography, and an excellent score, it makes these scenes just as thrilling as scenes in any sports movie. And that's just another thing. This show just looks really good. It has that wonderful picturesque 50s and 60s setting, and everything is so well realized that I never would have known that the majority of this show wasn't even filmed in the US. The costumes, environment, it all looks great. I now understand why people fell in love with this limited series. The main character is really interesting, and the performance sells that hidden pain the character carries with her. The chess matches are exhilarating, and it's a story I think benefits from having a longer runtime, as the slow build-up pays off in one of the most satisfying ways I've ever seen. I know I've mainly focused on the character of Beth in this review, but for me, that's the heart of the story, and it wouldn't work without her character and that performance. Anya Taylor-Joy is an absolute star, and I'm glad I finally got the time to sit down and watch this short 7-part series from beginning to end, because it was worth it, and it's a series I plan on watching over and over in the future, and hopefully come away with something new to talk about. So, with all that said, I'm going to give The Queen's Gambit a 9 out of 10. I know I'm very late to the game watching this series, but when something is just so popular, it's hard for me to get into it right away. But I'm glad I finally saw it, because it really was worth it, and now it's one of my absolute favorites. But what do you think of The Queen's Gambit? Let me know in the comments section below, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.